what is the impact that Ethereum has had, and more importantly, will have on the world of business? And if you have been sitting at home and thinking, wow, this is ridiculous. Like, I've heard about blockchain in the enterprise for years and years and years, and the impact is very slow. What's taking so long? The answer is a couple of really challenging things have been keeping the world of enterprises and the world of blockchain relatively separate. Financial services, yes, it's enterprise, but it's not quite the same as most like traditional business to business applications. And so that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. Maybe I want to jump to slide number 3, which is, maybe slide number 4, next one. So one of the things that I think people forget about, and one of the things that is kind of my theme in the world of blockchain, is that everything is going to take longer than a lot of people realize. So making blockchains work for enterprises, we should be looking back at some of the other big technology transitions in the global economic kind of history. And one of the things that we saw over and over again was that, for example, the vision for new technologies is always incredibly ambitious. And what happens is we go through these ups and downs on the path to realization. And the reality, for example, with e-commerce was early on people were like, oh, it's going to be this like multi-trillion-dollar industry and it'll be ready by 2005 or 2010. And that's actually not what happens. And the reason it doesn't happen is because it's actually really, really difficult to transform entire industries. And I'll just share with you like a couple of simple examples. In the early days of e-commerce, it was actually easier to order like a pallet of something than a single item. And if you wanted to have a digital order, you could order things, but there often really wasn't any pictures or any kind of content to go with it. And the reason for that is because digital ordering, which absolutely existed at the time, was built and optimized for store managers to order refills for their big retail systems. They didn't need to know what the product looked like. They already knew they had it in store, right? And so there were all these detailed operational obstacles that were preventing people from implementing that. And the process of getting around it was very, very slow. We had to sort of knock down one barrier after another. And a very similar thing is going on in the world of blockchain, right? We have a lot of challenges from an enterprise perspective, but the two most important ones that I'll be talking about today, or really covering on briefly, are number one, scalability. So when we sit down and we think about like, what is it going to take to bring the world's big enterprises onto the public Ethereum blockchain, which, by the way, is my personal goal. It's going to take a couple of things. Number one, massive volume. So today, Ethereum can handle 1 to 2 million transactions a day. And when we've made so much progress with all the L2s now. So when I think, when we sort of guess at EY about sort of what's the total capacity of Ethereum, now that we have all these L2s, it's probably in the hundreds of millions of transactions a day. So in the last 18 to 24 months, we've gone from 1 to 2 million transactions a day to hundreds of millions. And we can see a path through sharding and other kind of capabilities to billions of transactions a day. Our own guess is that we think we need to be able to get to about 40 billion transactions a day on Ethereum for enterprises to sort of fully deploy their applications. Now, we don't have to get there right away, not by any means, but we have to get there eventually. And so that's a really kind of important thing that we need to get across. And then the second thing that we need to deal with is privacy. So enterprises are not going to do anything on blockchains without privacy. And so, and again, there's a really good analogy to the world of e-commerce, which is that when they didn't really have a privacy problem, but they had a sort of security problem, which was that in the early days of e-commerce, you couldn't actually encrypt your web transactions. That little sort of lock icon that we're so used to seeing on web browsers now didn't exist because general purpose encryption wasn't available to the public. It was actually considered a munition, and its export from the United States, for example, was actually restricted. So those things had to be knocked down. And when those challenges get knocked down, the result isn't some overnight explosion. And this is the last thing I want to talk about in this particular slide, which is that when big obstacles get knocked down, the result is not a few years of 500% growth. The result is 20 to 25 years of 20 to 25% growth a year. That's what the big transformations will look like. And that's what the sort of timeline that we need to think about. So let me go into a little bit of the transformations that need to happen and the ones that are yet to be done. Maybe let's jump to slide number 6, and I'll just talk about a little bit about what I'm going to cover for the rest of this discussion. So I want to talk about like what I think of as the 5 big transitions that enterprises have to make in order to take advantage of blockchain. I think in many ways, large parts of the crypto ecosystem are already there, but enterprises are still sort of figuring this stuff out. And then we'll go into kind of a little bit of what EY is specifically trying to do in this space and where I think we need to go ahead. So let's go to the next page, which is what are these 5 big transitions? So I think enterprises need to make 5 big transitions in how they think about blockchain. The first is to move away from this idea of like, hey, blockchains are cool for like just time stamping documents. Yeah, that's cool. For the most part, this has happened. Enterprises now understand tokenization is what matters. Secondly, fiat currency, stablecoins, these are hugely important. Most enterprises do business in dollars and euros and yen, and that's what they need to be transacting on in chain. Thirdly, they need to think of blockchain as a fully integrated part of their business ecosystem and regulatory structure. Fourth, and this is the most important, the most difficult one, for enterprises to wrap their heads around, which is that private blockchains or permission blockchains don't work. And if you're on ETHGlobal, you're probably like me, a public blockchain maxi. And one of the things that I really struggle with is like, who thought that a centrally managed, decentralized ledger would be a good idea? I think it's crazy. And yet companies are investing tens of millions of dollars in these projects, and they have a terrible history. They in almost always kind of end up badly, and it's super frustrating. People ask me oftentimes in meetings. I just finished a trip pretty much all around Asia: Tokyo, Hong Kong, Singapore, Sydney, and I get asked over and over again, Paul, what is the thing that you can say to business executives that will get them to move to public blockchains? And I have to tell you, I have tried like packaging up this message in so many different ways with no noticeable success. The only proven way to get an enterprise to embrace public blockchains is for them to try a private blockchain and realize it doesn't work. And then lastly, I think it's incredibly important that we change the way for enterprises that they think about privacy. And by the way, I think this is also really true for individuals as well. A lot of sort of privacy and rights maxis sort of they think about privacy and anonymity as quite the same thing. And the reality is that if we want Ethereum to be fully integrated into the global kind of business ecosystem, we need to accept that anonymous financial transactions and payments are probably just not going to be a feasible thing that we can have. But what we can have is confidentiality. I think people have a right to privacy, and enterprises absolutely should not have to tell their competition what they're doing. I think, particularly in the case of enterprises, I'm not sure that enterprises have a right to privacy, but I believe that enterprises won't use the technology unless they can be confident that their business transactions can't be seen by their competitors, which is not at all the same as can't be seen by the regulators or can't be inspected upon request by the regulators. So we try to think about privacy as confidentiality rather than anonymous transactions. Now, in particular, jumping ahead a couple slides to number 9, there's 2 types of privacy that people need to understand. Number 1 is the transfers and payments, and the second is smart contract terms. And it comes down to a relatively kind of straightforward concept, which is that every business agreement is based on kind of a fairly simple model, which is I have money, you have stuff, and I want to exchange my money for your stuff under the terms of an agreement. So the money and the stuff, the movement of those things needs to be private. Otherwise, your competition can see what you're doing. But secondly, the terms of your business agreement, the key rules, what you're paying for, when you get a discount, how much money you're expecting to spend, those business terms and conditions also need to be private. So when we think about how to address these privacy challenges, these are the two categories that we think in. And EY specifically has been working on two big projects, which we have and are donating into the public domain in the Ethereum ecosystem. So these are contributions that we are donating. They're public domain software applications. And the first one on the next page is called Nightfall. And Nightfall is an Ethereum layer 2. It's on page 10 of the slides. It's an Ethereum layer 2, which is designed for enterprise confidential business transactions. And it just covers the money and the stuff, the movement of the money and the stuff. It is an L2 privacy. It's a ZK optimistic rollup for enterprises. And the goal here is that using this privacy technology, enterprises can move to business models like asset traceability, inventory management, cross-border trade, where they can move around tokens that represent products or services and receive payments without their competition being able to see what they're selling and how much they're being paid. Those transfers are confidential. The way we think about it is the transfers are confidential, but they're not anonymous. And the reason that they're not anonymous is because in order to transact in the Nightfall ecosystem, we have designed it in such a way that you have to have an enterprise X.509 certificate. And that is basically an enterprise identity certificate. It's a variation of the SSL certificates that are used by companies on the web all the time. So in terms of the sort of ecosystem of privacy, Nightfall fills in kind of a unique space, which I try to describe on the next page, which is page 11, which is that, we think about this sort of two dimensions. Number one, anonymous versus identified, and private transactional data versus public data. So if you think of somebody's ENS domain, like prbrody.eth, that's my ENS domain, right? That's public. You can go look at that. You can see what NFTs I have. And it's also identified. You know who that's associated with, right? An Ethereum address, generic one, it's effectively anonymous, but public. Then you have other services that are both anonymous and private, like Tornado and Zcash. And those are not suitable for enterprises because regulators will really basically not allow them to use them. What Nightfall does is it offers you private transactional data, but identified by the users. And what that means is that enterprises will be able to see what enterprises are transacting on the network. You will not be able to see what they are actually doing, the content of those transactions. So that's one half of the picture. Second half of the picture is the business logic. So if we skip ahead 2 slides, and we'll talk about the other thing that we've donated into the public domain, which is called Starlight. And what Starlight does is it basically allows you to take the business logic and turn it into a zero-knowledge circuit. So Starlight is basically a smart contract compiler. And what it does is it allows you to take a traditional Solidity smart contract, mark it up, and then transcode it into a zero-knowledge circuit that enables a private business logic to run on the public Ethereum mainnet. So it kind of runs as a black box, right? And what that means is that if you can make an Ethereum contract, you can make a zero-knowledge circuit. And this is really cool. We actually, Starlight emerged from our own failure at EY to teach our developers how to make zero-knowledge circuits. We have, in EY, we have some developers who work on regular Solidity contracts, and then we have a team of mathematical experts in London that do a lot of our ZK research for privacy technology. And we thought, okay, we understand how to make these zero-knowledge circuits. We understand how to do Nightfall, which is just movements and transfers, but we could do other things as well. We could teach our other developers how to do this. It turns out, actually, we weren't very good at teaching it. It was really, really hard to learn. So what we did was we basically said, hey, developers, we're going to make a little transpiler. And all you have to do is mark up, follow the directions, mark up your smart contract in Solidity, and turn it into a zero knowledge circuit. So that was much, much more successful. Now, both of these are available at our GitHub. It's github.com/EYBlockchain. Nightfall is a ZK optimistic L2. It's running today on the as a layer 2 on the Polygon proof of stake network. It has not yet been deployed on the Ethereum net. You can run it on testnet. We are thinking about mainnet deployment, but we're also about halfway through Nightfall version 4, which will have some significant improvements. We might wait for mainnet deployment until then. So that's what we've done. Again, both of those public domain, open source, contributions by EY and some other entities and individuals that have supported this work into the Ethereum ecosystem. So not something that we are retaining control over. So how do we make use of these things? Like, what is it that actually we can do with this stuff? And the answer is we can do a lot of cool stuff. And the best way to illustrate this is I made a little slide on page 16, which sort of talks about how does this work? And it's fairly simple. If you think about a business-to-business supply chain today, they're very, very digitized, but they're all siloed, right? When I started my career, and I'm old, you can see all my gray hair. When I started my career, you could we would say, oh, we need to digitize our clients. And we had clients that had a lot of stuff that was offline, or they were just running it all in a spreadsheet. I actually remember one of my first supply chain implementation projects. The client kept talking about Excel. Oh, we're doing it all in Excel. And I was like, I asked my boss, I'm like, is there some kind of like sophisticated supply chain software that just happens to have the same name as a spreadsheet? And he's like, no, they're running their $10 billion global supply chain in Excel. And that was pretty common. Today, and most big enterprises are much more sophisticated, but they're all still got these like little silos. And when you try to move between silos, they literally send faxes. I was at a client in Singapore earlier this week. They admitted they're still sending all their orders to their key suppliers by fax, which is hilarious. There's EDI, which is like business to business text messaging, PDF files, Excel files. That's not a great way to move data around. On a blockchain, right, we can basically, if we go to the next page, under Nightfall, I can represent a supply chain on page 17. I can basically represent a supply chain as a bunch of tokens. And under privacy, I can move those tokens around. And the cool thing is, those tokens, just like any other blockchain asset, are subject to prevention of double spend, right? You can prevent double spend. When you move a token from company A to company B, you're moving all of its associated data, and the company that has a token can see all of its history. And this is really important. You want to know where something came from. You need to find out kind of what the history is, or you get a notification that a batch of product is bad. It's really easy to figure that out. And of course, when you put those together on the next page with the smart contracts, you have this ability to govern how all of these things should work together, which is, in my mind, is kind of this really fully integrated, automated vision of the future. And you can do really awesome stuff with this, like supply chain management, business procurement. Maybe it's not exciting to you. It's exciting to business people. Supply chain management, business procurement, carbon traceability, which is, I think, is a really positive and constructive one that we can do. So I get really excited about all of these capabilities. And it's also why, kind of, when I think about what it is that if I could describe the power of blockchain and its impact on business, I kind of boil it down to one sentence on page 20, which is that we think blockchains will do for business ecosystems what ERP did inside the enterprise. And it's going to be really transformational. We spent 2 decades as a business world kind of trying to get companies to stitch up all of their data together. And it's really, really difficult. And that's what ERP was all about. It was kind of 2 decades of business transformation. Now we can do the same for the interactions between other companies. And the impact can be really enormous. And I'm just going to share one example with you that I really, really like, which is on page 25. Somebody is Karthik, I think, is being very generous, and he's moving all the slides for me because my iPad doesn't support showing slides at the same time. But Karthik, if you want to go on to page 25, um, uh, this is a case example from the work that we did with Microsoft. And for those of you who don't know, EY actually built a procurement system on the blockchain for Microsoft. Now, this was on a private blockchain because we didn't yet have our privacy technology mature. This is about 5 years ago that we did this, but it's a really cool case example of a case where we know the power of this system. Every single Xbox video game that gets bought is run through a smart contract system that EY developed for Microsoft. And the way this works is companies like Microsoft they have thousands of business agreements that cover all of the different sort of smart contracts or business relationships that they have with their key suppliers. And each one of them is a little bit different. It has different threshold or a different royalty rate or something like that. And Microsoft was having a hard time. It was a lot of work kind of at the end of each month processing all of the transactions and giving everybody a statement. With the smart contract product that we made for Microsoft called Contract Manager, we were able to cut that basically to 5 minutes, right? 99% reduction in cycle time, roughly half the cost, and much happier business partners because they felt like they could inspect through the portal all the stuff that was going on. Now, that was 5 years ago using smart contracts on a private chain. And what I'm really pleased with is that today we are in the testing phase for the new version of this product that runs using Starlight on the public Ethereum blockchain. And I really hope that before the end of this year, at the beginning of next year, I'm going to be able to share publicly the name of our first client that's actually doing a business procurement agreement with secure private business logic on the public Ethereum blockchain with privacy technology, which will be kind of an enormous, enormous achievement. So I'm getting close to the end of my time. I'm going to jump to the end here and just sort of talk a little bit about, on page 32, some things that I'd like people to keep in mind, which is timelines, right? It takes decades and decades and decades to build really transformational stuff. And I talk about, and you'll hear other people talk about, we're building new rails for business. And so I thought it'd be fun to look at like the history of the actual railroad industry. Most of the U.S. railroad track was actually built up in a period of about 70 years. I think, we can look back and say we kind of made a mistake by getting rid of a lot of it. But what's really amazing is it took about 70 years to build the U.S. railroad network, it's about as hard a piece of like infrastructure as you can build. But on the next page, this is the thing that's really amazing. Over the last 150 years, we have improved the productivity of this infrastructure that we built every single year, almost every single year. If you go to the next page, what you'll see is that over 150 years, the average annual productivity increase in the global railroad network is 3% a year on average every single year for 150 years. And so when we think about kind of building Ethereum into the world of business, what I hope people will keep in mind is the sort of long-term timeline, which is that it takes decades to build, and the payoff can take, keep delivering for more than a century. So to me, that's kind of what's very, very exciting. And that's the time frame. We should be thinking about time frames. And I saw a great quote the other day. Sam Altman was talking to a bunch of people, and he said, your plan should be measured in decades, and your execution should be planned in weeks. And I really love that sort of capturing of the thoughts. But yes, I think about the impact that we're going to have from Ethereum on the world of business in the course of decades. Going to wrap up here, page 36. If you thought this was interesting, may I just suggest one more thing, which is I wrote a book. I wrote a book on this. I can say I wrote the book on this. I think it's the only book that's out there that's really focused on the use of Ethereum in the world of business. I'm actually very proud of the excellent endorsement that I received from Vitalik. This is somebody I've known for about 10 years now. I met him in 2013 when I was working at IBM and worked on IBM's first blockchain. And I had been in the world of enterprise blockchain for a decade now. It's called Ethereum for Business. It's available Amazon, Apple, Google, Walmart. I think it's a pretty good read. It's in use at about 5 universities now, and uh, I hope you enjoy it. And I think that is it for me. And I'm only about 1 minute over my schedule. So thank you everybody for watching and tuning in.